Imagine you are sitting in a glass-walled conference room, right? It's your quarterly review.
Yeah, high stakes.
Exactly. And your manager smiles warmly. They lean across the table and they tell you that, your presentation skills are fantastic. The team loves your energy. They're just so excited about your future here.
Sounds great so far.
Right. So you shake hands, you walk out feeling completely victorious, and you head back to your desk thinking, I am on the fast track to a promotion. But what you don't realize, because you didn't hear the subtle, heavily coded language buried right in the middle of that conversation, is that your manager just quietly initiated the timeline for your termination.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
And, it happens every single day in corporate America. People walk right off a cliff because they thought they were walking on a nicely paved road.
And that is exactly why we are here. Welcome to another deep dive. Whether you're listening to this right now because you are, prepping for a high-stakes performance review tomorrow morning, or you're just insanely curious about the hidden, sometimes manipulative codes of human behavior, today's exploration is custom-tailored for your career survival.
Absolutely.
We are unpacking a truly fascinating source document today. Originally, this material was designed as an advanced, C2 level English learning curriculum. But we aren't using it to learn English vocabulary today.
No, we are using this text as a Rosetta Stone, basically.
Yes, to decode the highly nuanced, deeply confusing, and, let's be honest, often terrifying minefield of criticism and negative feedback in the American workplace.
The stakes literally couldn't be higher. Because what we're really talking about here is professional literacy. I mean, you can read a spreadsheet, right? You can read a P&L statement. But if you cannot read the subtext of the feedback you're receiving, you're functionally illiterate in the corporate ecosystem.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because our mission today is to arm you with the cultural framework, the linguistic decoding skills, and really the psychological armor you need to turn negative feedback from a career ender into pure career fuel.
Which is a massive shift in mindset.
Huge. And as I was reading through these sources, a massive realization hit me. Most of us spend years, literally decades of our lives, right? And tens of thousands of dollars learning how to project ourselves outward. Think about it. We learn how to nail the job interview.
Right, or how to write the perfect persuasive email.
Exactly. We take seminars on negotiating salary. We practice in the mirror to present to a board of directors. Everything is about output. But almost no one, not in business school, not in corporate onboarding, literally nowhere, teaches us how to catch the arrows when the world shoots a message back saying, you are failing, you need to improve.
It is the great blind spot of professional development.
Mm.
We are entirely obsessed with projection.
Yeah.
We want to be the ones speaking, the ones presenting, directing the room. But the uncomfortable truth that separates mid-level employees from true executive leaders is that how you receive criticism matters infinitely more than how you deliver a pitch.
Wow. Infinitely more.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can be the most articulate, charismatic, diplomatically skilled professional in the entire building. You can give breathtaking TED Talk level presentations. But if you crumble, or if you become visibly defensive or completely shut down the moment someone points out a structural flaw in your work, all of that communication prowess is instantly irrelevant.
Because you look unteachable.
Exactly. The ability to absorb difficult truths about your own performance without your ego hijacking your brain is the ultimate test of professional maturity.
And before we can even get to the mechanics of, how to respond to that criticism without our egos detonating, we first have to understand why Americans give it in the first place. Because if you look at the global landscape of business, the underlying cultural philosophy here is entirely counterintuitive.
It really is. It's a completely different paradigm than what a large portion of the globe operates on.
Right.
We have to start with the foundational premise here. In the American professional ethos, feedback, specifically negative constructive feedback, is viewed fundamentally as a gift.
A gift, which, let's be honest, sounds completely absurd.
Mm.
When you are the one sweating through your shirt in a one-on-one, being told your quarterly metrics are terrible, it feels like a punishment, not a present.
Oh, it feels awful in the physical moment. Absolutely.
Mm.
Nobody wakes up hoping to be told their project management is chaotic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or their code is full of bugs.
Mm-hmm.
But look at the mechanics of what is actually happening. The cultural assumption is that the person giving you this feedback is spending their most valuable, non-renewable resources on you. They're spending their time, their emotional energy, and their social capital.
Because delivering criticism is deeply uncomfortable for the manager too, right?
Exactly. People hate conflict. The manager is taking an interpersonal risk by sitting down with you, and they are only doing it because they have run a subconscious return on investment calculation, and they believe you are an asset worth developing.
They're investing in your trajectory.
Yes. If they didn't care, they wouldn't say a word.
And that leads to this terrifying reality that the sources highlight, which completely upends how a lot of people view office dynamics. In American corporate culture, the absence of feedback is far more dangerous than the presence of it.
Precisely. If your manager is regularly giving you constructive criticism, if they're, pulling you aside after a meeting to tweak your approach or redlining your documents, it means they are paying active attention to you. They see potential. They are in the trenches with you, fighting for your development. But if you never get any feedback, if every presentation you give is just met with a generic good job or total apathetic silence, that is a blaring red alert alarm bell.
I was trying to think of how to visualize this because it is so counter to our instincts. Silence from your boss isn't a clean bill of health. It's the doctor walking out of the exam room without making eye contact.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. It should make the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. It means they've looked at the chart, realized the condition is terminal, and decided they simply can't help you.
That is a chilling but incredibly accurate analogy. In the American context, silence often means a manager has mentally checked out on your development. They've run that cost-benefit analysis in their head and decided you simply aren't worth the emotional labor of coaching.
Because it's too exhausting to correct you.
Yeah, or even worse, they have already quietly initiated the timeline for your termination, and they're just waiting out the clock, keeping you comfortable until HR finishes the paperwork.
But here is where the massive culture clash happens and why this curriculum is so vital. If you are an international professional, say from East Asia, South Asia, or the Middle East, silence is exactly what you have been trained to strive for.
Yes.
In those professional contexts, no news is good news. If the boss isn't actively yelling at you or publicly correcting you, you are succeeding. Silence is the ultimate stamp of approval. You are doing your job perfectly.
What's fascinating here is the sheer magnitude of the cognitive delay that non-native speakers and international professionals face in these moments.
What do you mean by cognitive delay?
Well, when criticism finally does arrive in an American office and it's delivered in a second or third language, the recipient is performing an exhausting mental juggling act in real time. First, you're simultaneously translating the English vocabulary. Second, you are trying to interpret this bizarre American cultural nuance where criticism is wrapped in a smile. And third, at the exact same time, your amygdala is firing, and you are trying to suppress a primal physiological fight-or-flight response because your brain perceives this as a threat to your livelihood.
You're doing calculus in a burning building.
Exactly. And that cognitive overload is incredibly dangerous because it often makes the recipient look physically flustered, intensely defensive, or sometimes completely unresponsive. The manager is sitting across the table looking at them thinking, wow, this person is really resisting this feedback. They are totally uncoachable.
When in reality, the person is just utilizing every ounce of their processing power to understand what is structurally happening in the conversation.
Right. They aren't rejecting the feedback. They're just trying to translate it.
So why does this matter for you, the listener? Because if you are sitting at your desk right now interpreting your manager's lack of criticism as a victory lap, you might be entirely blind to the fact that your career is stalling out. You might be celebrating while your head is quietly resting on the chopping block. You have to reframe your entire worldview to recognize that receiving feedback is actually a positive signal of investment, but only if you know how to decode it when it arrives.
And decoding it is an art form in itself because American criticism is almost never blunt. It's, heavily wrapped in diplomatic camouflage. We prioritize pleasantness and conflict avoidance over direct clarity.
Right, which brings us perfectly into decoding the delivery mechanisms, because once you accept that feedback is coming, you have to know what it looks like. And the most obvious loud mechanism is the formal performance review, quarterly, semi-annually, annually. But we cannot treat these as just casual catch-up.
No, absolutely not. The formal review is a permanent organizational record. It's a legal and administrative document that lives in your personnel file.
Wow.
Yeah. It dictates your compensation, your bonus multiplier, your eligibility for promotion, and ultimately your continued employment at the firm. You cannot treat it as a casual chat over coffee.
But the way these formal reviews are structured is so uniquely, confusingly American. We have to talk about the feedback sandwich.
Yes. The infamous sandwich.
Or the compliment sandwich. I hear this term thrown around constantly, often as a joke, but the sources break down why it's used mechanically and why it's so incredibly dangerous if you don't know how to eat it.
The sandwich structure is essentially this. The manager opens the conversation with genuine praise. They highlight your strengths, they mention a great project you just finished, they tell you how much the team likes you.
Right, that's the top slice of bread.
Exactly. Then they pivot and deliver the actual constructive criticism, the meat of the sandwich. This is the stuff you actually need to fix, the deficits in your performance.
Okay.
And then, before you can get too upset and before you leave the room, they give you a bottom slice of bread. Closing encouragement. Optimism about your future, telling you they are excited about your trajectory.
Okay, I have to push back on this concept because from an objective standpoint, isn't this just lying? Or at the very least, deep, confusing manipulation? I mean, if I am eating an actual sandwich, I don't focus on the bread, I focus on the meat. The bread is just the delivery vehicle for the pastrami.
Right.
But it sounds like people are walking out of these performance reviews only remembering the bread. They go back to their desk, call their spouse, and say, wow, she said I have great presentation skills and she's excited about my future. And they completely, entirely ignore the part where she said their data analysis is consistently sloppy and causing client friction.
You've hit on the exact vulnerability of the sandwich method and why it fails so often. It's highly susceptible to confirmation bias. The human brain wants to feel safe, so it latches onto the praise and discards the threat.
Yeah.
Now, the praise usually isn't fabricated. American managers generally don't lie about your strengths. They aren't making things up just to flatter you. But the danger is real.
So why do they do it?
The psychological purpose of that top and bottom layer of praise is to create what organizational behavioralists call a psychologically safe container. A manager is actively trying to lower your defenses to soothe your ego so that your prefrontal cortex stays engaged and you can actually hear the meat of the criticism without panicking.
But if I'm from a different culture, that container just looks like a maze of mixed messages.
Exactly. Many cultures, think of Dutch, German, Israeli, or Russian professional cultures, find this absolutely baffling and frankly a bit dishonest.
Yeah, I bet.
In those cultures, a manager will just hand you the meat. They'll look you in the eye and say, your performance on this financial model was inadequate. Your assumptions were wrong. Here is what went wrong. Fix it by Tuesday.
Unambiguous. No carbs, just protein. You know exactly where you stand.
Right. And there is a strong, compelling argument that the direct European approach is far more respectful because it treats you like a resilient adult who can handle the truth without needing it sugar-coated like a child taking medicine.
That makes sense.
But, and this is the vital, non-negotiable takeaway for the listener, you cannot change the American corporate system to suit your cultural preference. You are playing on their field under their rules.
Right.
You have to learn to eat the sandwich, and you must train your ear to completely ignore the bread and hyper-focus on the meat. The criticism in the middle is the priority signal. In fact, it is usually the only reason the meeting was scheduled in the first place.
So how do we practically train our ear to hear the meat? Because it's not always obvious. The source material provides this incredible, terrifying framework. It breaks down the language of American feedback into a 5-level escalation spectrum.
Yes, this is crucial.
Because managers don't just jump from, you're doing great, to, you're fired. They slowly, methodically turn up the heat. And if you aren't paying attention to the specific vocabulary they use, you'll boil like a frog in water without realizing it. Let's walk through these levels because this is survival knowledge. Level 1 is the gentle suggestion.
Right. This is the absolute softest form of feedback. A manager might say, something you might want to consider for the next project. Or, have you ever thought about trying this software approach? It sounds conversational. It sounds like a friendly idea from a peer. It sounds entirely optional.
It's not optional.
It is absolutely not optional. It is a politely wrapped, direct order. The manager's telling you exactly what to do, but they're framing it as a suggestion to preserve your autonomy and avoid triggering your defensiveness.
Right.
If you treat it as an optional idea and you ignore it because you prefer your own way, you will immediately escalate to level 2. You have just failed the first test of coachability.
Which brings us to level 2, the constructive observation. This is where the manager says, one area where I think you could really grow is, or a great opportunity for you moving forward would be to, again, the camouflage here is incredibly thick.
Extremely thick.
They're using words like grow and opportunity. Those sound like positive, exciting things. If I hear opportunity, I think of a promotion.
They're criticisms expertly translated into the language of potential. When an American manager identifies an opportunity for growth, they have identified a specific deficiency or failure in your current performance. They are preserving your dignity by framing the gap as an exciting place for you to develop, rather than a failure on your part. But make no mistake, it's a gap that they expect you to close immediately. If they say, an opportunity for you is to be more vocal in client meetings, they're saying, you're currently too quiet in client meetings, and it is a problem.
Then the temperature really goes up. We cross a threshold into level 3. The direct concern, the phrasing here shifts. They say, I want to be transparent with you. I've noticed that. Or, I need to flag something regarding your recent output.
The diplomatic cushioning is thinning out rapidly here. The word transparent is the absolute key indicator.
Transparent.
Yes. When an American manager says, I want to be transparent, they're explicitly signaling that what they're about to say breaks the normal, unwritten rules of pleasant, softened corporate speak. They're verbally acknowledging that the conversation is about to be uncomfortable, but the issue has become serious enough that they have to drop the facade.
So if you hear that,
If you hear the phrase, I want to be transparent, you need to sit up straight and be at full attention. The issue is now affecting the team or the bottom line.
okay, so if you ignore the transparent conversation, you hit level 4, the formal warning. Now, the manager's tone is completely different. They're saying, I need to be very direct with you, or this is something that needs to change immediately.
Patience is diminishing. Urgency is high. Words like need, require, and change completely replace, might consider, opportunity and grow.
Right, the bread is gone.
Exactly. If you're at level 4, you're likely entering the territory of formal documentation with human resources. The manager has probably had the level 1, 2, and 3 conversations with you over the past few months, felt entirely ignored or dismissed, and is now putting their foot down to protect their own department's performance.
And if you still don't fix it, if you are still oblivious, you hit level 5, the final escalation. And the source material highlights a specific phrase here that is just haunting. A manager will look at you, usually in a very brief, tense meeting, and say, if this doesn't change, we'll need to have a different conversation.
A different conversation. It is the most chilling euphemism in American business English.
It's terrifying because it's so vague. It sounds like you're going to talk about baseball instead of quarterly earnings. But what is the actual mechanism behind that phrase? What does it mean?
It means imminent termination. It means you are going to be fired. That is the final verbal warning before the HR paperwork is signed and your access badge is deactivated.
Unbelievable.
Because the American cultural norm heavily prioritizes politeness and conflict avoidance, and because companies fear lawsuits, a manager will almost never say, I'm going to fire you next week. They say, we will have a different conversation. You must learn to hear the siren blaring behind those polite, ambiguous words.
Okay, so if we can recognize the danger levels, if we can finally hear the meat inside the sandwich, how do we actually catch it in real time? Because knowing intellectually that I'm being criticized doesn't stop my heart from pounding.
Right.
It doesn't stop my face from getting hot or my stomach from dropping. How do we prevent our egos from detonating the conversation the second we realize we are at level 3 or level 4?
This brings us to the evolutionary instinct we touched on earlier, and we need to look at the neuroscience of it. When you are criticized, your brain does not distinguish between a physical threat, like a lion running at you, and a social threat, like your boss telling you your code failed.
It all feels like danger.
Exactly. Your amygdala, the fear center of the brain, fires. It floods your system with cortisol and adrenaline. Your instinct is to defend yourself, to justify your actions, to deflect blame, to counterattack. You want to shout, I didn't do that, or, well, the marketing team didn't give me the data in time, so it's their fault.
But the sources are incredibly clear on this point. Defensiveness is a fatal error.
It is the worst possible move you can make. When you get defensive, you immediately make yourself look uncoachable. You are signaling to your manager that protecting your ego's comfort in this exact second is more important to you than your long-term career survival, the success of the project, or the health of the team.
Yeah.
A manager who sees a defensive employee sees a dead end. They realize that every time they need to correct you, it will be an exhausting battle. So they will simply stop correcting you and start replacing you.
To combat this biological hijack, the source material introduces a brilliant framework. It's a masterclass in real-time response called the HERE model. HEAR. Let's walk through the mechanics of this because this is the tactical armor you need to wear to every meeting. The H stands for halt.
Halt means stop. Literally, physically, do not speak. Your emotional brain is screaming at you to explain yourself, to launch into a monologue of excuses. You must enforce a physical, disciplined silence. Just take a breath. 2 seconds of silence feels like an eternity when you are under fire, but it's not awkward. It is the ultimate reclamation of your agency. That 2-second pause takes the processing power out of your reptilian emotional brain and gives your prefrontal cortex the logical, strategic part of your brain time to come back online.
2 seconds feels like an hour when you're being criticized, but it is an absolute lifesaver. Then we move to E, which stands for empathize, and here's where it gets really interesting. Because when I read this part of the curriculum, I actually laughed out loud.
It is surprising.
I am the one being criticized. I am taking arrows. My job is on the line. And I am supposed to comfort the person shooting the arrow at me.
I know it sounds entirely backwards. It feels like surrender. But this is where true professional mastery comes in. You say something like, "Thank you for being honest with me about this. I know these conversations aren't easy to have."
Wait, if my boss tells me I'm failing because of a mistake my coworker made, and I just sit there in silence and say thank you, aren't I basically signing my own death warrant? Aren't I admitting fault for something I didn't do?
No, and that is the crucial distinction. It's not surrendering. It's psychological judo. What's fascinating here is the physical effect this has on the manager. Think about their state before the meeting. They didn't sleep well. They are anxious. They are sweating. They expect you to fight them.
Right.
Thanking someone for criticizing you is so incredibly rare, so entirely unexpected in corporate dynamics that it instantly disarms the manager. When you empathize with their discomfort, their cortisol drops. You instantly transform the dynamic from an adversarial conflict into a collaborative coaching partnership.
Wow.
It signals an elite, almost unheard of level of professional maturity. You aren't agreeing that you are terrible at your job. You are simply validating that delivering the feedback was hard, and you appreciate their investment in you. You preserve the relationship.
Okay, I see the nuance there. You lower their shield by dropping yours first. Then we move to A, which is ask. Ask clarifying questions. Instead of arguing, you investigate. You say, could you walk me through a specific example of when my communication fell short? Or can you help me understand how this delay affected the client's timeline?
Exactly. You are turning a monologue of criticism into a dialogue of discovery. Asking for specific examples prevents the feedback from remaining vague and unactionable. If they say, you're unorganized, that's useless.
Right, you can't fix unorganized.
But if you ask for an example and they say, you didn't send an agenda before the last 3 meetings, that is a measurable behavior you can fix. Asking about the impact on the team shows that you aren't just obsessed with your own ego, but you care about the organizational ecosystem.
Yeah.
You can also ask about the ideal outcome. What would the ideal standard look like going forward? This shifts the conversation from the painful past, which you cannot change, to the productive future, which you can control.
And finally, the R in the HERE model is respond. But you don't just say, okay, I'm sorry. The source explicitly says do not just say I'm sorry. That sounds like a scolded child. It sounds passive. You acknowledge the gap. You say, I see it.
I see it is a massive paradigm shift. I'm sorry focuses on guilt and shame. I see it focuses on vision and alignment. You are telling the manager, I am standing next to you and I am looking at the same reality you are.
That's powerful.
Once you say you see it, you commit to a proactive action plan. You say, over the next 2 weeks, I'm going to implement X and Y checklist to ensure this doesn't happen again. Can we check in on Friday to review my progress? You establish a follow-up mechanism so they know you aren't just saying words to escape the uncomfortable room.
But let's look at the hardest scenario. What if the manager is just factually wrong? What if the criticism is entirely unfair? You followed the process perfectly, but the server crashed, or the client lied to cover their own mistake. The biological instinct to scream, that's not true, is overwhelming. But the HERE model still applies, right?
It applies even more strictly. You never, ever say that's not true to your manager in the heat of the moment. It creates a direct adversarial clash of realities. It forces the manager to defend their authority, and you will lose that battle.
So what do you do?
Instead, you halt, you empathize, and then in the ask and respond phases, you propose a collaborative investigation. You say, thank you for letting me know the client felt I was unresponsive. I actually have the sent timestamp showing I replied within an hour. Is it possible there was an IT delay with the server? I'd love to look into this together to see what happened.
I'd love to look into this together. That is magic. You aren't calling the boss a liar. You aren't calling the client a liar. You are sitting on the same side of the table as your boss, looking together at this mysterious third-party problem that needs solving. You correct the record and defend your competence without being combative.
You preserve the relationship while fiercely defending your work. That is the ultimate tightrope walk of American corporate feedback.
So the HERE model works beautifully when it's just a verbal conversation. It's your shield in a one-on-one. But what happens when that transparent conversation fails and HR suddenly enters the chat? What happens when the feedback escalates from a tense chat into a terrifying formal HR document? That brings us to the most dreaded document in corporate America, the PIP.
Ah, yes, the Performance Improvement Plan.
Exactly.
For many international workers, the PIP is often a completely foreign and utterly terrifying concept. A PIP is a formal written document drafted by your manager and approved by HR that identifies exactly where you are failing. It sets highly specific, measurable goals for you to achieve, usually on a tight 30, 60, or 90-day timeline, and explicitly states that failure to meet these goals will result in further disciplinary action.
And in corporate speak, further disciplinary action universally means termination.
Universally, yes.
The outline uses an analogy. A PIP is like the check engine light in your car. It might mean you just need an oil change and some tuning up, or it might mean the engine is totally blown and you need to immediately look for a new vehicle. But honestly, as I read deeper into the mechanisms of this, I think it's more sinister than that. A PIP isn't just a warning light, it's a legal fortress. And the source material is brutally honest about this. There are two entirely different narratives regarding what a PIP actually is in practice.
Yes, the check engine analogy only works for narrative one. Narrative one is that the PIP is a genuine coaching tool. It is used in good faith by a manager who actually wants to retain you. They put you on a PIP to force focus, to get you the budget for extra resources or training, and to provide a structured pathway back to good standing. In this narrative, survival is entirely possible, and the company is rooting for you.
But narrative two. Narrative two is that the PIP is nothing but a termination runway. It is the legal fortress.
Yes. In narrative two, the decision to fire you has already been made behind closed doors by your manager and their boss. But to protect the company from wrongful termination lawsuits or discrimination claims, HR requires a paper trail.
Right, they need documentation.
Exactly. They need documented, irrefutable proof that you were given a fair chance and you failed. Every metric in that PIP is just another brick in the wall they are building to protect the company from you. So they construct a PIP with impossible goals or incredibly vague, subjective metrics just to run down the clock for 30 days before legally letting you go.
So if you are handed this document and your stomach is in your shoes, how do you mathematically know if you are being coached in good faith or if you are just walking the green mile?
You have to read the signals in the surrounding environment carefully. Genuine PIPs have achievable, highly specific goals. Furthermore, your manager will be actively engaged. They will set up weekly meetings, they'll offer you external training, or they might even reduce your daily workload so you can focus exclusively on the PIP objectives.
And the fake PIPs.
A fake PIP, the termination runway, will have moving goalposts. The goals will change weekly. The manager will seem emotionally disengaged, they'll frequently cancel your check-in meetings, and the criteria for success will rely on subjective feelings like needs to show more leadership presence, rather than hard data like process 50 invoices a week.
If you find yourself staring across the table at a PIP, the curriculum gives us 5 critical action steps. Step 1 is H-out. We know this from the HERE model. Do not react emotionally in the meeting. Cry in your car. Do not cry in the office. Do not sign it immediately if you can ask for 24 hours to review it.
Right. Protect your reaction.
Step 2, demand specific, measurable criteria in the document itself.
And let's explore how to do that without sounding insubordinate. This is a vital defensive maneuver against the legal fortress. If the PIP says, improve communication with the engineering team, you cannot accept that. It is too subjective. You must ask them to define exactly what that means.
How do you phrase that?
You say, I am fully committed to hitting this goal. To ensure I meet your exact expectations, can we define improved communication? Does that mean sending a daily update email? Does it mean responding to JIRA tickets within 2 hours?
That's brilliant.
By forcing them to quantify the goals, you reduce the employer's plausible deniability. It makes it much harder for them to fire you at the end of 30 days if you can prove mathematically that you hit the exact numeric targets written in the HR document.
Step 3. Document everything obsessively. Save your emails to a personal drive if legally permissible. Track your metrics on a private spreadsheet. Keep a daily log of your achievements.
Create your own paper trail.
Exactly. Step 4. Simultaneously launch a confidential job search. Give the PIP your absolute all. Fight for your current job, but get the life goats ready. And step 5. This is the one that we really need to pause and expand on. Because for the international audience, the stakes here are life-altering. If you are on an employer-sponsored visa, like an H-1B or an L-1, you must consult an immigration attorney immediately.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the harsh pragmatism required here is immense. And it is a reality that American-born workers simply do not comprehend. Let's look at a hypothetical employee, Dev, who moved from Mumbai to Seattle on an H-1B visa. He has a wife, 2 kids in local schools, a mortgage, and a car lease.
Okay, setting the scene.
For an American citizen, failing a PIP means losing a job. It's financially stressful, but you go on unemployment and look for another job. For Dev, failing a PIP means losing his right to exist in the United States.
It's an existential cliff.
Exactly. If Dev is terminated, the clock starts ticking immediately. He has a 60-day grace period to find a new employer willing to sponsor an expensive, complex visa transfer. If he fails to secure that in 60 days, he has to uproot his family's entire life, pull his kids out of school, sell his house at a loss, and leave the country.
That is just unimaginable pressure.
Therefore, if Dev is put on a 30-day PIP, he absolutely cannot wait until day 29 to see how the manager is feeling. He cannot hope for narrative 1. He has to assume narrative 2. He must fight for his current job, smile in every meeting, and demonstrate total coachability while secretly carrying the terror of his family's potential deportation, interviewing during his lunch breaks, and paying retainers to immigration lawyers. It is an extreme, unparalleled test of psychological endurance.
It's survival, utter, relentless survival. But let's step back from the brink of termination for a moment. PIPs and performance reviews are loud. They are formal. They have HR's fingerprints all over them.
Right.
But as we transition away from formal documents, the source material tackles something that I think is actually much trickier on a day-to-day basis. Reading between the lines. Decoding informal feedback.
This is the most frequent type of feedback you will ever receive in an American office. It's the passing comment made as you're walking out of the conference room. It's the 2-sentence Slack message. It's the casual chat by the coffee machine. And precisely because it is so casual, lacking the gravitas of a formal review, it is the easiest to completely misinterpret or safely ignore.
Let's play a game of translation here based on the curriculum's examples. I'll give you the informal American office speak, and you give me the decoded hidden translation. Ready?
Let's do it.
Scenario 1. I hand in a massive draft of a proposal. My manager looks at it, nods, and says, "This is a good start."
Translation. This is unfinished, inadequate, and requires massive revision before it can be shown to anyone else.
Wait, really? Just from good start?
Yes. If the document were actually good and ready to go, they would say, "Nice work," or "This looks great, send it out." By explicitly qualifying it as a start, they are politely telling you that you are nowhere near the finish line, and they're expecting a V2 by tomorrow morning.
Ouch. Okay, scenario 2. I speak up in a large cross-functional meeting and challenge a VP's project timeline. After the meeting, a colleague walks up to my desk and says, "Wow, that was brave of you to pull up."
This one is highly ambiguous and requires immense situational awareness. It could mean genuine admiration. You had the courage to say what everyone else on the team was thinking, but was too scared to voice to the VP.
Okay, or,
and this is the dangerous one, it is a diplomatic, urgent warning. They are saying, you just said something politically dangerous, you completely misread the power dynamics of this room, and you might have just painted a massive target on your back.
So brave is essentially a corporate Rorschach test. If you don't have the emotional intelligence to read the room's microexpressions, you're flying blind. How do you figure out which version it is?
You have to become an anthropologist in your own office. You have to read the microexpressions. Did your colleague whisper it with wide eyes while looking over their shoulder? Did the VP's jaw clench during the meeting? Did the room go dead silent after you spoke? It is an exercise in extracting the signal from the noise. You have to contextualize the phrase with the body language of the ecosystem.
Okay, scenario 3. My boss pulls me aside on a Friday afternoon and says, "Hey, I want to give you some food for thought over the weekend regarding your presentation style."
Translation. This is not a casual musing. This is not philosophical nourishment for you to ponder at your leisure while walking your dog.
Which is exactly what it sounds like.
Right. But it's a priority action item disguised as intellectual nourishment to soften the blow. Whatever they say next is a direct, serious criticism of your presentation style that they expect you to actively fix before your next presentation on Monday.
Scenario 4. We just lost a major client pitch. In the team debrief, the manager looks at the whole group of 10 people and says, going forward, let's make sure we all double-check the financial models before presenting. But everyone in the room knows I'm the one who built the model.
Translation. This is a public address regarding your specific individual mistake. The manager is addressing the entire team to allow you to save face publicly. They aren't singling you out by name, which preserves your dignity, but make no mistake, that was a corrective slap on the wrist aimed directly at you.
So I shouldn't just think, oh, good reminder for the team.
Absolutely not. You are expected to absorb the lesson, fix the models, and feel the weight of the correction without requiring the manager to schedule a separate private scolding.
Last one. I send my 40-page slide deck to a peer for review, and they reply on Slack, wow, these slides are really detailed.
Translation. Your presentation is a visual nightmare.
A nightmare from the word detailed.
Yes. It has way too much text, it is visually cluttered, and you need to heavily simplify it. In American corporate culture, clean, minimal, easily digestible slides are the executive standard. Detailed in this specific context is a polite, softened synonym for unreadable or overwhelming.
This is exhausting. Trying to constantly translate pleasantries into warnings takes so much mental energy, but it highlights exactly why understanding the underlying mechanisms of this behavior is necessary. You can memorize every linguistic trick, every translation, every cultural code we've discussed today, but the curriculum pivots here to the most fundamental truth. If your emotional brain short-circuits in the moment of criticism, none of those tools will save you. We have to drill into the psychological neuroscience of criticism.
It is the bedrock of everything we are discussing. Why does criticism hurt so much? Because psychologically it feels like an attack on your identity.
Right.
And the source text makes a really poignant observation about immigrants and international professionals here. If you have moved across the world, learned a new language, left your extended family behind, and rebuilt your life from scratch in a new country, your professional competence is often the core pillar of your new identity. It is why you are here.
That makes total sense.
So when a manager attacks your work, it doesn't just feel like a critique of a spreadsheet. Your brain interprets it as a threat to your survival, your value as a human being, and your justification for making all those sacrifices.
The stakes feel existential. The brain fuses, I made a mistake, with, I am a mistake. But the text offers a profound psychological reframe. Criticism is not a verdict on who you are. It is merely data. It is information about what you have done in a specific moment in time. Conflating your identity with your behavior is the root of the devastation.
Exactly.
I like to think of it this way. It's like finding a typo in a novel you wrote. The typo doesn't mean you're a terrible author who lacks creativity, and it doesn't mean your entire 300-page story is garbage. It just means your finger slipped on the keyboard, you fix the typo, you don't burn the book.
That is a perfect encapsulation of what Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck calls the growth mindset. Let's look at the mechanics of this because it literally changes your neural pathways. A fixed mindset believes that your abilities are static. So when you receive criticism, your brain perceives it as a final judgment on your permanent limitations. Your amygdala fires, causing pain.
Okay, and the alternative?
But a growth mindset is the belief that abilities can be developed through dedication. When you interpret feedback as a roadmap rather than a limitation, your brain processes the criticism in the learning centers, not the fear centers. It becomes a data point for improvement, not an emotional wound. And in the US, demonstrating a growth mindset is a massive career accelerator.
Because it makes you coachable again?
Yes. Organizations heavily reward employees who course correct rapidly using data without requiring constant emotional hand-holding from management. Resilience isn't about feeling zero pain when you're criticized. It is about not letting that biological pain dictate your external response.
To help build that resilience, the text outlines 5 specific psychological strategies. These are the tools to keep your brain out of the fear center. Number 1, the 24-hour rule. Delay major reactions while your emotional brain is in overdrive. We all know the hypothetical story of the employee who gets a bad review at 4 p.m., goes home, drinks 2 glasses of wine, and sends a blistering defensive email to their boss at 11 p.m.
Oh, the fatal midnight email.
Exactly. That email destroys their career. The 24-hour rule prevents that.
Exactly. It allows the cortisol to literally flush out of your bloodstream so your logic can return. Number 2, separate signal from noise. This is crucial when dealing with a bad manager. Find the actionable kernel of truth in the feedback, even if the delivery was clumsy, unfair, overly harsh, or wrapped in a confusing sandwich.
Just ignore the bad packaging.
Yes. Ignore the angry tone, ignore the unfair comparison they made, and extract the tier data. They said my tone was rude, but the underlying data is that I didn't CC the client on the update. Fix the CC issue.
Number 3, reframe the narrative. Instead of falling into a spiral and thinking, I'm failing, they hate me, actively force your brain to consciously think, my manager cared enough to spend their political capital to give me clarity. I now know exactly what the target is, and I can hit it.
It changes everything. Number 4, talk to someone. Venting is psychologically necessary. You need to release the pressure valve, but you must do it strictly outside the company. Talk to a spouse, a college friend, a mentor in a different industry. Never, ever vent about your manager's feedback to a coworker by the water cooler.
It's just too risky.
It breeds gossip, it will eventually get back to your manager, and it permanently damages your reputation as a resilient professional.
And number 5, channel energy into action. Visible progress is the ultimate antidote to the sting of self-flagellation. Don't sit at your desk staring at the wall feeling sorry for yourself. Open the document and fix the typo.
Exactly. Nothing silences the internal critic in your head or the external manager sitting in the corner office faster than undeniably, tangibly improved work.
Action cures anxiety. Now, we've spent this entire deep dive figuring out how to survive the feedback that is thrown at us, how to build the armor, how to decode the hidden messages, how to catch the arrows. But the curriculum pivots here, revealing that the truly elite professionals, the ones who ascend to the C-suite, the ones who command immense respect, they don't just survive criticism. They flip the script entirely. They go out and actively hunt for it.
Becoming a proactive feedback seeker changes everything about your professional trajectory. First, it prevents small, easily fixable issues from ballooning into PIP-level crises. Second, it explicitly demonstrates to leadership that you are highly coachable and hungry for growth.
And third,
psychologically, it gives you immense control. If you initiate the conversation, you control the timing, the setting, and the emotional preparation, rather than being ambushed by a calendar invite on a random Tuesday afternoon.
the advice here is to ask immediately after specific events. Don't just sit in a random one-on-one and ask a massive, vague question like, how am I doing overall? That yields useless platitudes. Walk out of the client pitch, pull your manager aside and say, do you have 5 minutes to discuss how my presentation went today while it's fresh? It grounds the feedback in immediate reality.
And the text provides a brilliant adapted framework for asking this, known as the start, stop, continue framework. You look at your manager and ask, based on today's presentation, what am I doing well that I should continue, and where do you see the biggest opportunity for me to grow?
It's so clever because you are using their own diplomatic, camouflaged corporate speak, the word opportunity, to invite the criticism. You are giving them a safe, pre-approved, psychologically comfortable pathway to tell you what's wrong without them feeling like they are attacking you. So what does this all mean? It means that taking control of the feedback loop turns you from a passive target waiting nervously to be evaluated into the active, confident architect of your own career trajectory.
It's profoundly empowering. And to put this into practice, the source material doesn't just leave us with theory. It leaves the listener with 5 concrete assignments. This is the application phase. Assignment 1. Here, model rehearsal.
Don't just understand it conceptually.
Right. Write down a script of a scenario where your boss criticizes your latest project. Sit in your car and practice saying the words out loud. Thank you for being honest with me about this. Train your mouth to form those words so that muscle memory takes over before your amygdala can scream, but it wasn't my fault.
Assignment 2. Proactive request. Ask your manager for feedback this week. Rip the Band-Aid off. Use the start, stop, continue framework on a minor project and see how the dynamic instantly shifts from evaluative to collaborative.
Assignment 3. A feedback journal. Create a private document. Track the feedback you receive. Log your initial emotional reaction to validate your feelings. Document the pure signal you extracted from the noise, and write down your concrete action plan. It creates a physical record of your growth over the year.
Assignment 4. The reframe exercise. Write down the most painful, devastating critique you've ever received in your career. The one that still makes you wince when you think about it in the shower. Now, rewrite that memory through a growth mindset lens. Strip away the emotion, find the behavioral data, and acknowledge the value in that painful memory.
And finally, assignment 5, the feedback partner. Find a trusted peer at your level and set up a monthly 30-minute reciprocal feedback exchange. Normalize the discomfort. Build the muscle of giving and receiving critique in a low-stakes environment so that when the high-stakes moments arrive, you are an athlete ready for the game.
I love that.
Because ultimately, as the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius wrote, the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Or simply, the obstacle is the way. The criticism that makes you the most uncomfortable is precisely the thing that holds your greatest opportunity for growth.
We've covered an immense amount of ground today. We've decoded the hidden language of American feedback, from the deceptive compliment sandwiches to the chilling, different conversation. We've learned how to neutralize our own biological defensive instincts with the HERE model. We've navigated the treacherous dual narratives of PIPs and the legal fortresses they represent.
We covered a lot of ground.
We decoded the casual Rorschach tests of office speak and learned how to separate our core self-worth from our daily work output. Remember, feedback is not a punishment. It is a compass. It points you toward mastery.
This raises an important question, though, and I want to leave the listener with this.
Yeah.
We established at the very beginning of this deep dive that a manager's silence means they have mentally checked out on an employee's development.
Right.
So I encourage every listener to turn the mirror onto themselves and look at your own behavior. Think about your peers. Think about the junior members of your team. If you are terrified of giving honest feedback to them because it feels uncomfortable or awkward, what does that say about your investment in them? Are you withholding the gift of criticism just to protect your own emotional comfort? And in doing so, are you quietly stunting the growth of everyone around you?
That is a heavy but vital thought to end on. If you want the X-ray of your performance to be clear, you have to be willing to operate the machine for others. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today. Until next time. So imagine two professionals, right? They're pitching the exact same data to a boardroom.
Okay.
The data is flawless. I mean, the projections are completely sound. The first professional stands up, delivers the facts with just perfect grammar, pristine vocabulary, and sits down.
Just a totally standard presentation.
Exactly. But then the second professional stands up. They share the exact same data, but they wrap those numbers in a brief, slightly self-deprecating story, something that gets a genuine laugh from the CEO.
Oh, that makes a huge difference.
Right. According to the research we are diving into today, that second professional isn't just, a little more memorable. They are 22 times more likely to be remembered than the first one. 22 times.
It is a staggering statistic, really, and it completely reshapes how we need to think about professional communication.
Okay, let's unpack this, because our mission for you today is to decode what is basically a completely invisible language. We've got our hands on a fascinating, highly detailed curriculum.
Yeah, it's designed for advanced English learners.
Right, but it isn't about, conjugating verbs or mastering the subjunctive mood. It is this ambitious, really granular breakdown of the secret art of American charisma.
Storytelling, humor, the stuff that actually matters.
Yes, we are trying to figure out how non-native speakers, and honestly, anyone looking to stop feeling invisible in a room, can move beyond textbook fluency to unlock true insider status.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it becomes glaringly obvious that language textbooks are fundamentally flawed. I mean, they teach you how to ask for directions to the airport, right?
Right, or how to write a polite email, dear sir or madam.
Exactly. But they treat humor and storytelling as these decorative extras, as if they are the cherry on top of the communication sundae. But in American professional life, humor and storytelling are not the cherry. They are the primary social lubricants. They are the engine of trust.
I was just blown away by the premise here. Because usually when we talk about a diagnosis, like a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision. You break your arm, the x-ray shows a jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, there's the problem.
It's binary. It's either broken or not broken. It's comforting because it's visible. You can categorize it.
Totally. But then you try to diagnose why you feel completely isolated at a corporate retreat, even though you technically speak the language perfectly. Suddenly, that x-ray machine is just useless.
Yeah, the diagnostic landscape of social dynamics is incredibly murky.
It's so frustrating for people who have spent years, decades, even achieving a C2 level of advanced English, only to realize that grammatical perfection just doesn't equal connection.
Precisely, which is why this deep dive is going to dissect the precise mechanics, the underlying architecture, and the specific cultural reference points that make American humor tick.
We're getting into the nuts and bolts.
We really are. We're going to map out the anatomy of a joke and the structure of a compelling narrative so you can actually, engineer that connection.
And it starts with the hard truth we hit right at the top. The case for charisma over grammar. The curriculum argues that the professionals who advance the fastest—
The ones who get tapped for leadership.
Right, the ones invited to the crucial client dinners— they aren't the ones with the dictionary-level vocabulary.
No, not at all. They are the ones who can command a room's attention, hold it, and then release the tension with a laugh. And the data supporting this is just overwhelming.
Yeah.
You mentioned the Stanford Graduate School of Business finding that stories are up to 22 times more memorable than facts alone.
It's wild.
But let's think about why that actually is. I mean, human brains did not evolve to process spreadsheets.
We evolved sitting around fires,
Yep.
right, listening to narrative.
Exactly. We listened to stories to understand where the danger was and where the food was.
So when you just dump raw data on someone, their brain actually has to work against its own evolutionary programming to retain it.
Precisely. But when you use a story, you bypass all that cognitive friction, and it gets deeper.
Yeah.
The Harvard Business Review notes that leaders who use humor effectively are rated 27% more motivating
Wow.
and 25% more admired than those who remain strictly serious all the time.
27% more motivating. I mean, that's not just some marginal difference. That is the difference between a team that goes the extra mile and a team that quietly quits.
And if you look at the Bell Leadership Institute, they surveyed employees to find out what direct reports actually want in a leader.
You'd think it would be a strategic vision or something.
Right, or unmatched technical expertise or a pedigree from some Ivy League school, but no. The top two desirable qualities were a strong work ethic and a good sense of humor.
Work ethic and humor. That is the winning combination right there. You work hard, but you don't take yourself so seriously that you're just miserable to be around.
Yeah, you have to be human.
But reading this section, I really felt the emotional weight of what happens when you don't have that second part. There's this concept discussed in the text called social invisibility.
It is a profound and really isolating pain point.
Think about this scenario for a second. Imagine you are an international professional. You have worked incredibly hard to relocate. You sit down at the lunch table with your American colleagues,
Okay.
and they are bantering, they are trading weekend stories, they are laughing, and you just sit there.
Yeah.
You understand every single vocabulary word they are using, but you just can't find the rhythm to jump in. The pacing is too fast, the references are obscure, and you end up feeling completely invisible in plain sight.
The linguistic barrier has been conquered, but the cultural distance remains massive.
Yeah.
I mean, you are physically at the table, but socially, you aren't even in the room.
It made me think of this analogy. It's like you have spent 5 years memorizing the entire rule book for a very complex multiplayer video game.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Right. You know all the stats, you know the maps, you know the character classes better than anyone else, but no one ever actually handed you the controller.
So you're just watching.
Exactly. You're sitting on the couch, technically the most proficient person in the room, but completely sidelined while everyone else is actually playing the game together.
That is exactly what it feels like. You have the knowledge, but not the mechanism for execution. But here is the critical pivot. To overcome this social invisibility, you cannot just memorize a list of jokes.
Because that would just be weird.
Right. A joke delivered without context is just a bizarre, unsettling statement. You have to first master the vehicle that delivers the humor. You have to build the road before you can drive the car. And in American culture, that vehicle is the story.
Which brings us to the actual architecture of an American story. We are going to build this house from the ground up because the text breaks this down into 5 very distinct, non-negotiable elements.
Let's get into it.
Element number 1, the hook.
The absolute foundation. Because if you fail here, the other 4 elements literally do not matter. No one is listening.
I'm obsessed with the hook. The curriculum states that every great American story starts with a hook that creates an irresistible information gap.
Yes.
You do not start chronologically. You don't start at the beginning of your day. You use a literary technique called in medias res, which literally means starting right in the middle of the action.
You drop the listener directly into the chaos.
Yes. The example from the text is just gold. Imagine someone starts a story like this. So there I was, standing in the middle of Times Square at 2 in the morning, holding a pineapple, wearing a suit, with absolutely no idea how I got there.
What's fascinating here is the psychology of that information gap.
Yeah.
Your brain is a prediction machine. It constantly wants to close loops and solve puzzles.
It hates an open loop.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when you hear about a professional in a suit holding a pineapple in Times Square at 2 a.m., a massive cognitive itch is created in your mind. You literally cannot tune out.
Even if you want to check your email.
Right. Even if you want to look at your phone, your brain demands to know the origin of the pineapple. It commands your attention by intentionally withholding the context.
But the context has to come eventually, which brings us to the second element, the setup. And this is where cultural differences really trip people up.
This is perhaps the most critical point of divergence for international professionals. In many cultures around the world, particularly high-context cultures in parts of Asia, the Middle East, or Latin America, providing an extensive chronological backstory before you get to the main point is a sign of respect.
It shows you're being thorough.
Right. It honors the listener by giving them the full picture.
You might start a story by saying, well, it was a Tuesday, and I woke up around 6:30. I had some toast and coffee. The weather was a bit cloudy. I drove to work taking the highway because the back roads were under construction.
And the American listener has already mentally checked out. They are thinking about their grocery list or their inbox.
Exactly. Why is that? Are Americans just impatient or rude?
It's not about rudeness. It's about how the culture values time. In American business culture, time is considered a literal currency.
Right. Time is money.
Exactly. You spend time, you save time, you waste time. Therefore, a long, meandering setup doesn't signal respect. It signals that you do not respect their time, or worse, that you lack the analytical skills to just get to the point.
So what's the solution?
The setup in an American story must be ruthlessly brief. You only include the specific details that are absolutely essential for the payoff of the story. If the weather doesn't matter to the punchline,
You cut the weather.
you cut the weather.
Ruthless brevity. I love that phrase. So you have your hook, the pineapple. You've kept your setup ruthlessly short, just enough to explain you were at a bizarre corporate scavenger hunt or whatever.
Right.
But if you stop there, you just have a weird anecdote.
Right.
To make it a story, you have to manufacture tension. How do you build that pressure? That brings us to elements 3 and 4, rising action and the climax.
This is where you pull the rubber band back.
To illustrate this, the text shares this incredibly painful yet hilarious example of an employee who accidentally calls their boss mom in a meeting.
Oh, brutal.
We've all had those Freudian slips, right? But look at how the storyteller stacks the tension in the rising action. They don't just blurt out, I called my boss mom today. They meticulously build the pressure cooker.
They establish the stakes.
Exactly. First, the brief setup. The boss is a very maternal figure, always checking if people have eaten lunch, very nurturing. Then the rising action begins. They're in a big team meeting, but not just a regular team meeting. The CEO has decided to sit in unexpectedly.
So the stakes are instantly elevated.
Right, you are layering the stress. Then another layer. There was an IT update the night before, so the presentation slides are formatted slightly wrong.
Oh, no.
The font is weird, the employee is sweating, the maternal boss leans forward and asks the employee to click back to a previous slide to clarify a number for the CEO. The employee is fumbling with the clicker, totally flustered, heart pounding, and then the climax, the moment of no return.
Here we go.
The employee looks directly at this vice president of marketing in front of the CEO and says,
And this is where the execution is everything. The pause.
yes. The text makes a massive point of this. You do not rush the punchline. You don't just say, I looked at her and said, sure thing, mom.
No, that ruins it.
You stop. You let the audience hang in the air. I look at her, the whole room is quiet, and I say, sure thing, mom.
That pause before the punchline is the fundamental mechanism of comedy. It is a microsecond of suspense that primes the listener's brain. When you pause, the audience literally leans in physically. Their brains are rapidly trying to guess what you are going to say.
It builds the anticipation.
Exactly. If you rush it, the punchline arrives before their brain has finished anticipating it, and the energy just deflates. The pause allows the anticipation to crest like a wave, so the punchline can crash down for maximum impact.
It's almost musical. You really have to rest on that beat. But the story doesn't end there. You don't just drop the mom bomb and walk away. Element 5 is the aftermath, or what comedians call the tag, or the button.
Because an audience needs emotional resolution. If you just end on the climax, It feels jarring. The tension is still hovering in the room.
In the mom story, the aftermath describes the immediate fallout. The dead silence in the room, the CEO biting the inside of his cheek to keep from laughing, the maternal boss looking totally confused. Then, that one tiny snort from the back of the room from a coworker that just breaks the dam, and suddenly everyone is howling with laughter.
A release.
And then you deliver the final tagline. You say something like, "I just stood there, holding the clicker, seriously considering changing my name and moving to another continent."
That tagline gives the audience one last, gentle laugh on the way out. It releases the final bit of tension and signals that the story is officially over.
So if we step back, this 5-part structure: hook, setup, rising action, climax, aftermath, is the skeleton. It's the framing of the house.
Right.
But a skeleton still needs muscles and a heartbeat to actually move. While a great structure holds the audience's attention, the specific flavor of that story in American culture relies on a very particular type of humor engine.
And the curriculum makes it glaringly clear what that engine is. The dominant form of humor in American professional and social gatherings is self-deprecation, making yourself the target of the joke.
This was a huge aha moment for me.
What's fascinating here is the cultural why behind this. If you think about the global perception of Americans, it's often associated with projecting confidence, swagger, and this relentless optimism.
Right.
So why would a culture so obsessed with winning rely so heavily on making fun of themselves?
It really seems like a contradiction.
It is, but it serves a vital sociological purpose. Self-deprecation signals authenticity and humility. When you openly mock your own mistakes, like admitting you called your boss mom, it proves that you are secure enough to own your flaws publicly.
It shows you don't take yourself too seriously.
Exactly. It strips away the corporate veneer, but most importantly, it makes you non-threatening.
Non-threatening. Explain that a bit more.
When you are the butt of your own joke, you are absorbing the comedic impact. You are lowering your own status momentarily, which subtly elevates everyone else in the room. It makes everyone feel safe around you. You aren't attacking them. You are exposing your own humanity.
Okay, I have to push back here for a second, or at least ask for some nuance, because don't Americans roast each other all the time? I mean, you watch American movies or sitcoms, and friends are constantly throwing insults at each other. They target each other's flaws relentlessly. It seems like targeting others is a massive part of the cultural fabric.
You're entirely right to point that out, because that is the exact perception exported by Hollywood globally. But the text issues a strict red alert warning for professional settings. What happens in a movie between lifelong friends, or what happens on stage at a comedy club, represents a fundamentally different social dynamic than a workplace or a networking event or a neighborhood barbecue.
So Hollywood is kind of lying to us about how office workers actually talk to each other.
Hollywood is compressing intimacy for the sake of entertainment. In reality, the social dynamics of banter or roasting are incredibly complex and fraught with danger. There are invisible rules about who can joke about what, and those rules are entirely based on power dynamics, hierarchical status, and relationship history.
So if I'm a new manager and I try to roast an intern the way I saw someone do it on TV,
it's a total disaster. Because of the power dynamic, you are punching down. The intern can't defend themselves without risking their job. Conversely, if you roast the CEO, you are wildly overstepping boundaries.
Right.
Jokes targeting others' characteristics, especially anything adjacent to race, gender, accent, age, or appearance, are literal career-ending landmines today. For an outsider trying to integrate, or even an insider navigating a corporate setting, trying to roast a colleague is just an unacceptable risk. The golden rule provided here is always make yourself the punchline.
Okay, so you've decided to fall on your own sword comedically. You're the target. But how do you actually generate the laugh? You can't just say, "I am bad at math," and expect people to crack up.
Right, that's just a statement of fact.
You need specific cognitive and linguistic tools to manipulate the language. This brings us to the mechanical toolkit of comedy.
The text outlines 7 specific mechanics. This is the toolbox you use to construct the jokes inside your stories.
I want to spend some real time on these because the examples are fantastic. Let's start with mechanic number 1, the unexpected turn. This is all about creating a pattern and then wildly swerving off the road.
The brain is lulled into a false sense of security and then you just jolt it awake.
The example given is talking about a diet. You say, "I've been eating so incredibly healthy lately. Today for lunch, I had a beautiful organic kale and quinoa bowl and a side of 3 slices of pepperoni pizza and a chocolate milkshake."
The reason that works is because the first half of the sentence establishes a persona, the health-conscious professional. The listener's brain expects the sentence to end with, "and a glass of water."
Right.
By sharply pivoting to pizza and a milkshake, you subvert the expectation completely. The laugh is literally the brain's physical reaction to the surprise.
Which connects perfectly to mechanic number 2, which might be the most famous rule in comedy, the rule of 3.
Yes, the rule of 3 is essentially the structural version of the unexpected turn. Human brains are entirely wired for pattern recognition. It's how we survive. When you list items, the first item introduces an idea. The second item confirms the pattern.
Okay.
At this point, the brain relaxes. It thinks, I know exactly what category we're in.
It's like a train running down a track. The first 2 items build the rails straight ahead.
Exactly. And the third item is where you suddenly switch the rails, sending the train flying off in a completely different, absurd direction.
The example here is brilliant. The 3 things I need to function in the morning are coffee, silence, and the will to live.
Let's break that down. Coffee and silence establish a very mundane, relatable morning routine pattern. The brain expects the third item to be a hot shower or checking my email. By inserting the will to live, you introduce sudden, hyperbolic existential dread into a mundane list.
The contrast is huge.
Yes. The massive gap between what the brain predicted and what it actually received is what produces the comedic explosion.
You mentioned the word hyperbolic, which leads right into mechanic number 3, hyperbole, which is just a fancy academic word for massive exaggeration. And man, Americans love exaggeration.
It is the default setting for American colloquial speech.
Seriously, an email doesn't just take a long time to send. It takes 9,000 years.
Right.
You don't just feel embarrassed about a mistake. You are literally dead. If you are hungry, you could eat a horse.
Hyperbole works because the listener knows it's not literally true. You are using extreme scale to communicate extreme emotion. But what's really interesting is how you deliver that hyperbole, which brings us to mechanic number 4, deadpan delivery.
Oh, I love deadpan. But wait, if I use deadpan, isn't that risky? If I deliver a joke with a completely straight face, won't my boss just think I'm depressed or being a jerk? How do you signal that it's a joke without smiling?
That is the tightrope walk of deadpan. Deadpan relies entirely on cognitive dissonance. You deliver absurd, ridiculous, or hyperbolic content, but your facial expression, your tone of voice, and your body language are completely flat and emotionless.
You play it totally straight.
Right. You're stripping away all the traditional visual cues of humor.
The text gives this great scenario. You show up to the office completely soaked from a rainstorm. A coworker looks at you and asks, "Wow, is it pouring outside?" And instead of laughing or saying yes, you reply with a totally straight face, "No, I just chose to shower fully clothed in the parking lot this morning. It's a new wellness routine."
If you smile while saying that, it's the goofy dad joke. But by maintaining the deadpan expression, you force the listener's brain to do a double take. They have to process the visual data. You look serious against the auditory data showering in the parking lot.
They have to do the math.
Exactly. They have to actively decode the sarcasm. And when they solve that mini puzzle, the comedic payoff is much more satisfying for them. They feel like they are in on the secret.
That makes total sense. It rewards the listener for paying attention. Mechanic number 5 is the callback. This is when you reference an inside joke or a funny moment from earlier in the conversation or earlier in the meeting.
The callback is the ultimate social bonding tool. If someone made a joke about the printer being possessed by a demon at 9 a.m., and at 4 p.m. you are handing out a report and say, "I managed to get this from the demon printer without losing an arm," you are weaving the group together.
It's like a little inside joke.
Yes, it proves you are actively listening, and it creates a micro-community of people who get the reference.
Mechanic 6 is the anticlimax.
This is the exact opposite of the unexpected turn. Instead of building a mundane setup and delivering an extreme punchline, you build an extreme, profound setup and deflate it with a mundane reality.
So like, I was stranded in the pitch dark, alone in the desert, my car was dead, the coyotes were howling, and as I looked up at the vast cosmos, I realized something profound that changed my life forever. I really should have bought AAA towing.
Exactly. The build-up promises deep philosophy or spiritual awakening. The delivery provides mundane, bureaucratic logistics. The deflation of the tension is the joke.
And finally, Mechanic 7, relatable observations. This is about voicing the universal, slightly embarrassing quirks that everyone does but no one talks about. Like acknowledging that going to bed is the only thing adult humans aggressively resist, even though sleep is the absolute best part of the day.
Or the example of rehearsing arguments in the shower.
Yes, we all do it. We are all undefeated champions of imaginary shower arguments against people who wronged us 3 years ago.
When you name a private quirk out loud, you create instant connection. People laugh because they feel seen. They think, oh, I thought I was the only crazy person who did that. It validates their own internal monologue.
But here is where we hit a massive brick wall. You can study these mechanics. You can master the unexpected turn. You can perfect the cognitive dissonance of your deadpan delivery. You can craft the ultimate, mathematically precise rule of 3. But if you don't share the same cultural dictionary as your audience, those beautifully constructed jokes will still crash and burn into total silence.
This brings us to a major section of the curriculum, the inside joke barrier. A massive chunk of American humor does not rely on structural wordplay or hyperbole. It relies on shared cultural references.
Right.
It's a shorthand language spanning decades of television, movies, and increasingly rapidly evolving internet memes.
If you aren't familiar with these references, it's like someone is speaking a dialect you've never studied. The text actually provides a media lexicon, like an essential curriculum of cultural touchstones. And we really need to actually explain these, because just naming them doesn't help anyone who hasn't seen them. Let's start with television. The Office is basically the holy grail of American workplace humor.
It is the foundational text for modern corporate banter.
The phrase, "that's what she said," you hear it everywhere, but why is it funny? For context, the main character, Michael Scott, is a deeply insecure boss who desperately wants his employees to think he's cool. Whenever someone says an innocent sentence that could accidentally be interpreted as a double entendre, like, wow, this is really hard, or it's bigger than I expected, Michael Scott immediately yells, "that's what she said!"
And the humor in the show isn't just the juvenile joke itself. The humor comes from the inappropriate timing. It's a boss using a middle school joke in a professional setting to deflect tension.
Right.
When Americans use it in real life, they were usually doing it ironically, imitating Michael Scott's lack of self-awareness.
Yeah.
If you don't know the character, you just think your colleague is being wildly inappropriate.
Exactly. You're just sitting there thinking, HR needs to hear about this.
Yeah.
Then there's Friends, which is still globally syndicated but heavily referenced. We were on a break.
A classic. This refers to the characters Ross and Rachel. They have a fight, Rachel suggests a break, Ross leaves with someone else, and for the next 7 seasons, anytime their relationship issues come up, Ross screams, "We were on a break," to legally absolve himself of guilt.
So when someone at work makes a mistake and defends themselves by yelling, "we were on a break," they're comparing themselves to Ross's desperate technical defense. Then there's Seinfeld. No soup for you.
This comes from an episode featuring a soup vendor who demands absolute militant perfection from his customers in how they order. If you step out of line, he bans you and yells, "No soup for you."
Right.
Today, if an IT guy denies you access to a server because you filled out a form wrong, someone might joke, "No soup for you." It's a shorthand for encountering arbitrary, tyrannical rules in daily life.
It's amazing how much data is packed into 4 words. And then they're the classic movie quote. Someone says, "Houston, we have a problem," from Apollo 13 when the coffee machine breaks, or "life is like a box of chocolates" from Forrest Gump when a project goes off the rails.
But the curriculum makes a crucial point. It's not just legacy media from the 90s and 2000s. Internet culture moves incredibly fast, and it heavily dictates the humor of millennials and Gen Z in the workplace today.
Let's break down some of this internet slang. Living rent-free in my head. What does that actually mean?
If a catchy song, or an embarrassing memory, or a weird comment a coworker made is living rent-free in your head, it means you cannot stop thinking about it. The joke is that this thought has taken up residence in your brain, and it's not even paying you rent for the space it occupies.
That's brilliant. What about main character energy?
This comes from TikTok. It describes someone who is acting as if they are the protagonist of a movie, and everyone else is just an extra.
Oh, I know people like that.
Right. If someone walks into a meeting late, holding an iced coffee, wearing sunglasses, and demands a recap, you might whisper, "Wow, major main character energy today." It's a gentle critique of narcissism.
And saying no cap.
Cap is slang for a lie. So saying no cap simply means I am being completely serious right now, or I'm not lying.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Imagine you are sitting at a conference table. Someone makes a Parks and Recreation reference about a character named Ron Swanson loving bacon. everybody laughs. You have literally no idea what's happening. Do you just fake a laugh and hope no one notices?
The curriculum offers incredibly empowering advice here. Just ask.
Just ask. Stop pretending.
Yes. There's a deeply ingrained fear for non-native speakers, and honestly, for anyone suffering from imposter syndrome, that asking will expose you as an outsider. You think, if I ask, they'll know I don't belong.
It feels risky.
But the psychological reality is the exact opposite. Americans absolutely love explaining their cultural references.
It's true. If you ask an American to explain a movie quote, they will light up.
Because you are validating their taste. If you say, I keep hearing people say, that's what she said? What is that actually from? Yeah, you are signaling active engagement. You are showing curiosity about their culture.
You're inviting them in.
Exactly. You are turning what could have been a deeply exclusionary, isolating moment into a bonding opportunity. Most people are immensely flattered when you ask them to explain why something is funny. It invites them to be the expert.
That is such a huge relief. You don't have to study 400 hours of TV. You just have to be willing to ask.
Yeah.
But while asking about a TV show is totally safe, the text explicitly warns that there are other communicative moves that are incredibly dangerous. If the cultural references are the barrier, this next section is the minefield. These are the career enders.
Yes, there are major pitfalls that can instantly destroy your credibility or cause deep, sometimes irreversible offense.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. The autopsy of a joke.
Ah, yes. The slow, painful death of humor.
We have all been there. You muster the courage, you craft your rule of three, you deliver the joke, and crickets. Absolute deafening silence. The natural human instinct, driven by panic, is to save yourself by explaining the joke. You start saying, see, it's funny because normally people don't shower in parking lots, so the joke is that...
But the curriculum notes that explaining a joke completely kills it. It's like dissecting a frog. You might understand how the frog works, but the frog is dead. Worse, explaining it causes a phenomenon known as secondhand embarrassment.
Ooh. Secondhand embarrassment is a physical sensation.
It is. Your audience isn't just not laughing. They are actively feeling pain on your behalf. They are cringing because they can see you floundering. Explaining a joke is fatal to your charisma in that moment.
So what is the proper recovery strategy? Do you just run out of the room?
The proper recovery is to confidently move on. A quick self-deprecating comment is your parachute. You smile and say, well, that sounded much funnier in my head, or swing and a miss on that one, and then you immediately pivot back to the business topic.
Anyway, moving on to the budget.
Exactly. It shows profound resilience. Often, the self-awareness of acknowledging that the joke bombed and doing so without panic gets a bigger and warmer laugh than the joke itself would have. It proves you don't take yourself too seriously.
Another major pitfall warned about is translation failures.
This is a classic trap for language learners. Humor relies heavily on untranslatable cultural logic. A joke that absolutely kills in Spanish, Arabic, or Korean might rely on linguistic wordplay, historical context, or subtle social assumptions that simply do not exist in English.
You cannot just run a joke through Google Translate and expect the humor to survive the journey. The words might be right, but the soul of the joke is lost.
You also have to avoid being tone deaf to the environment. Forcing humor into a serious situation like an HR safety meeting, a discussion about severe budget cuts, or, God forbid, a round of layoffs is a massive red flag. It signals a severe lack of emotional intelligence.
But the trap I want to focus on, because I think everyone, native and non-native speakers alike, falls into it, is the sarcasm trap.
Sarcasm is exceptionally dangerous territory.
The curriculum gives a stark, neon-flashing warning about using sarcasm in text-based communication. I'm talking about emails, Slack messages, Microsoft Teams.
Let's break down why text-based sarcasm fails. Sarcasm requires the listener to understand that you mean the exact opposite of the literal words you are saying. In spoken language, we use a complex array of tonal cues to signal this. We draw out a vowel, we use a specific musical inflection, we roll our eyes, we smirk.
Like, oh yeah, I would love to work on Saturday. You hear the sarcasm in the stretch of the word love.
Precisely. But in an email, all of those tonal cues vanish. You are left with just the cold, literal text. If you write a sarcastic comment to a colleague you don't know very well, say they make a mistake and you reply, "Great job on that report," it will not read as a gentle joke. It will read as sincere, unadulterated, aggressive hostility.
They will think you are furious with them.
Sarcasm should be strictly reserved for established relationships where your personal tone is already deeply understood by the recipient. Or you must use emojis to explicitly flag the joke, though that has its own professional risks.
Right. So if we manage to navigate that minefield, if we avoid the autopsies, if we don't translate Arabic wordplay directly into English, and if we ban sarcasm from our emails, we can actually start using humor as a strategic tool in the workplace. It's not just about being the office clown, it's about leadership, it's about persuasion.
It is about high-level stress management and emotional intelligence. Humor is a lever you pull to change the energy of a room.
The text breaks down exactly how to use humor strategically. First up, icebreakers and humanizers. Think about starting a grueling 3-hour budget meeting. Instead of just coldly reading the agenda, you acknowledge the shared pain in the room. The curriculum gives a brilliant example of delivering a disappointing Q3 financial report. The speaker stands up and says, look, if this Q3 report were a movie, it wouldn't be Top Gun, Maverick. It would be more like Titanic, beautiful in a few spots, but we all know it's going down at the end.
That is a masterfully constructed strategic joke. Let's analyze why. First, it acknowledges the bad news immediately, which builds trust. Second, it does so without inducing panic or dread. It softens the emotional blow. Third, it uses a universally understood cultural reference. Everyone knows the Titanic sank. And finally, it humanizes the speaker before they have to dive into the hard, depressing numbers. The audience is now on their side.
It's also an incredible tension diffuser. Let's say two colleagues are arguing in a meeting. We've all been there. The energy's getting heated. Voices are raising. A leader can step in and say, I feel like we need a referee and some popcorn in here.
If we analyze that scenario, the brilliance of that specific joke is that it diffuses the conflict without taking sides. If the leader says, Bob, you're being too aggressive, Bob gets defensive. But by making a joke about referees and popcorn, the leader calls out the absurdity of the tension gently.
It breaks the spell.
Exactly. It breaks the spell of anger. It gives everyone permission to take a breath, lower their shoulders, and allows the leader to steer the room back to productive dialogue.
And this strategic humor even extends to your email personality. We talked about the dangers of sarcasm, but adding a gentle, self-aware joke to an email builds immense social capital. For example, if you're sending a massive data file, you write, attached is the Q3 data report. I promise it is slightly more exciting than it sounds, though I recommend coffee before opening.
It builds positive emotional associations. When people see your name pop up in their inbox, they don't groan. It changes you from a transactional robotic coworker into a three-dimensional human being that people actually want to interact with.
But here's the catch. Understanding these strategies intellectually, listening to us talk about the Titanic or the referee, is entirely different from executing them in real time under pressure. You can read a book about the physics of riding a bicycle all day long, you can memorize the gear ratios, but you still have to get on the bike, wobble, and fall down to learn how to balance.
Which brings us to our final section, the gymnasium, practicing the skill of connection. The curriculum is very firm on this philosophical point. Humor is a skill, not a genetic trait. You aren't just born funny. Charisma is not magic. It is a set of learned behaviors, and you build the capability through deliberate practice.
And it provides 7 highly practical exercises to actively build your comedic arsenal. You don't just hope to be funny, you train for it.
The first exercise is building a story bank.
I love this concept. The idea is that you sit down with a notebook and craft 5 to 10 personal stories. You think of the weirdest job interview you ever had or a terrible travel disaster, and you script them out using that 5-part structure we talked about. Hook, setup, rising action, climax, aftermath.
And then you practice them. People think professional comedians just walk on stage and invent brilliant observations on the spot. They don't. They write a story, and then they tell that exact same story hundreds of times at small comedy clubs to refine the pacing.
They test it out.
Right. They figure out exactly which word gets the laugh. They figure out exactly how long to hold the pause. Listeners should treat their personal networking stories with the same level of craftsmanship.
You have a story ready for the elevator. You have a story ready for the client dinner. It takes the pressure off. Next, you keep an observation journal. You literally carry a small notebook or use the Notes app on your phone, and you write down the daily absurdities of life.
The weird interaction you saw at the coffee shop. The bizarre autocorrect fail in a text message.
Yeah.
The sign on the highway that made no sense.
Exactly. That becomes your raw material for those relatable observations we talked about earlier.
Then there is the comedy immersion protocol.
This sounds like a CIA torture program, but it's really just actively studying comedy, not passively watching Netflix while scrolling on your phone. You put your phone away and you watch specific comedians like John Mulaney or Ali Wong. The curriculum specifically points them out as great for non-native speakers because their humor is highly narrative.
It's structured.
Right. They tell long, structured stories rather than relying on rapid-fire, untranslatable puns.
You watch them with a critical eye to spot the techniques.
Mm-hmm.
It's active analytical consumption. You watch a special and say, there's the rule of three. Oh, look, he just used deadpan delivery. There's the callback to the joke from 10 minutes ago. You start seeing the matrix.
And then you need a feedback loop.
Mhm.
You take your story bank and you practice in low-stakes environments, like with a trusted friend or at a casual coffee meetup, and you do a reaction study. When a joke bombs, and he'll bomb you, don't panic. You analyze why. Was it the timing? Did I rush the pause? Did they not understand the cultural reference?
And finally, the most humbling, agonizing exercise of all, the recording exercise.
This is brutal.
Taping yourself telling a story.
Nobody wants to hear their own voice recorded. It sounds terrible. But the text insists that listening back allows you to catch things you're completely blind to in the moment. You catch where you rush the punchline. You hear yourself using filler words like or like that destroy the momentum of the rising action.
It is painful, yes, but it is unequivocally the fastest way to improve. It forces you to confront the gap between how you think you sound and how you actually sound.
You know, throughout all these structural rules, the hyperbole, the intense recording exercises, the curriculum makes one incredibly comforting point near the end that really stuck with me.
What was that?
It reminds the reader, you do not need to be a stand-up comedian. You don't need to walk into a boardroom and have the room howling with laughter, slapping their knees. You just need to be a human being who can connect.
That is the ultimate goal. A gentle smile in a stressful meeting, a shared moment of recognition over a mundane frustration that is enough to dissolve the social invisibility. You are just trying to prove that you are on the same emotional wavelength as the people around you.
So what does this all mean? We've gone on quite a journey today. We started with the raw data, the Stanford statistics, proving why storytelling is mathematically proven to advance your career. We broke down the anatomy of an American story, from the hook to the aftermath. We explored the specific mechanics of unexpected turns, the rule of three, and the cognitive dissonance of deadpan delivery.
We navigated the cultural minefield of the office quotes, the dangers of email sarcasm, and the fatal error of explaining a joke.
And finally, we got into the gymnasium to talk about how to actively practice with story banks and observation journals. It is a comprehensive roadmap to getting off the sidelines and actually playing the game. Laughter is the ultimate proof of connection. It's a bridge between two minds that completely transcends vocabulary and grammar. But before we sign off, I know you had a thought about the underlying psychology of all this.
Yes, this raises an important question, something for you, the listener, to mull over as you go out into the world. We spent a lot of time talking about how American humor is heavily reliant on self-deprecation, on deflating tension, and on breaking patterns. What does it tell you about the immense underlying pressure in American culture?
Pressure to do what?
Pressure to appear perfect, to be highly productive, and to be constantly successful. Perhaps the reason Americans laugh so hard at their own failures and rely so heavily on hyperbolic stress jokes is that humor is the only time they are culturally permitted to admit that they are exhausted.
Wow.
The corporate culture demands invulnerability. The joke is the pressure valve. I'd encourage you to look at what any culture laughs at. It is almost always a secret map to what that culture secretly fears or the hidden pressures its people endure.
That is a lot. That is going to stay with me. The things we laugh at are the pressures we are trying to survive. That is a profound way to look at a joke. Thank you for that insight. And thank you to you listening for joining us on this deep dive. We started by talking about how an X-ray gives you a clean, jagged, white line of a broken bone, but social dynamics are murky waters. Hopefully today we've handed you some powerful sonar to navigate those waters. Don't let your perfect grammar keep you invisible. Take these tools, build your story bank, ask about the inside jokes, and go actively practice the art of connection. Until next time.